Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is May 3, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Ariel Dougherty. Ariel, pronounce your name once so I can hear you say it.
You did it great. Ariel Dougherty.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Where are you calling in from?
I live in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico.
How cool is that? I'm calling from Venice, California. And the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Well, I think actually touch.
Oh my God, what a word.
Because I've been thinking about this a bit. We all rely or need some level of touch with each other. And I've also been thinking about it in relationship to like my dog, or if you had a horse or cat. They also, like dogs and horses especially, like to lean into you and touch. And cats kind of, rub up against you and then go off on their own. So they're slightly different in their relationship. But the other thing is that film itself is very tactile. And when
Yeah.
you're editing, I mean, I loved editing film. I miss it. Because you can actually feel the ridges, and it's physical because you're stretching out the takes of the film. And so actually for me, digital work is difficult because it goes through a different synapse in your brain, and you don't touch it. You never,
Really well put.
you
So
never.
yeah, you never touch it, and it's so well put because I think the word celluloid is important there. When people say film, they might think, oh, you're just thinking of moving image, but you're saying there's actually celluloid film that people touched, and
Right.
which is most of the history of 130 years of film, that it was actually celluloid. And I wanted to go back to the word touch just right off the bat. That's one of my favorite answers ever in 40 years asking that is Craig Baldwin said, what's your favorite form of, no, actually, this was the next question that I asked. And I won't even go into that. I'll ask the next question next because I jumped one. Because I used to ask this question first, and then what's the best thing for a human being became the first one. So this question is, what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into
Well,
you?
I think that, I mean, touch is really it. I mean, I
Yeah,
kind of brought the two together
you
because
brought the two together because
right,
see, this when Craig Baldwin said, my favorite form of information is human touch, I was really intrigued because people don't think in general of information as being touch. And then Ann Magnuson said, what's your favorite form of information? She said, the hug, which
right,
is human
right,
touch.
right.
But why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Oh, um, because well, I think many of us, not everybody, has a sense of history, and the accumulation of information is history. And so and actually, historically, it's women who've been the primary collectors of that information. Institutions have taken that creative bent of women and institutionalized it in a way, and also then pretty much cut us out of the process. Um, so, but I've been working on a research project and going to people that worked around women make movies. And some people have good memory and collected things or whatever, and other people don't. I mean, it's really actually very interesting to me, so, not everybody collects, but I don't know whether, Dee Dee Halleck. There's a film that's being made on Dee Dee Halleck. She's, one of the most important independent filmmakers of my generation. And she has stacks and stacks. I mean, maybe a house full of boxes of collected information.
Yeah, well, no, it's going to be beautiful to see how they condense it, because that's the important thing in this sensibility we come from, is how do you knock this life down to 90 minutes, and then everyone will know that person from the 90 minutes. And it's like, the beauty is, because I'm reviewing the new George Carlin doc right now, it's 4 hours.
Right.
Bogdanovich did Tom Petty for 6 hours. We grew up with more that you do it in 90 minutes or maybe 2 hours. And so now this is sort of great that it's getting expanded. And then, it has services and disservices. So, but let's stay on this for a second about information. Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate in humans or more invented?
I think it's pretty innate.
Yeah.
Because, if you look at sort of archaeological digs of grave sites, for instance, there are artifacts that are put in some people's graves that are significant to the culture or to that person.
Yeah.
And I think if those things were not of value in the culture, they wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that, the cave paintings that were done, early on in human history, are another form of that story or collection.
Yeah.
And actually, to me, are very significant because they're visual.
Yeah.
And we don't have the written or the word. We don't have that verbal story that happened in that time period. So the visual becomes paramount.
Really good. And we're going to touch on that soon. Let's go into this for a second. Do thoughts create emotions?
Yes. Absolutely.
Is thinking more innate or more invented?
I think it's probably pretty innate, but I think it certainly varies from human to human.
Right. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
Wake up.
Nice. I love that word. It's one of my favorite words. Wake. Can humans think without language?
Yes, yes. I mean, historically, I think that we had much more thought and mental telepathy that had nothing to do with language. And that we share, if you have, I mean, I know that dogs know what we're thinking. I mean, not always, but they have a sense. I mean, I had a, a a bull mastiff at one point, and my husband would be off all day, and we didn't have a telephone at that point. And when the dog got excited at the door, I knew my husband was on his way home in about 15 minutes.
Wow, that's cool.
And
So
there's a lot of documentation about that.
yeah, oh yeah. So Chomsky says that a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
Well, I think that, this is a central point in the feminist movement, that the recreation of language was paramount, and meaning too, was paramount to changing the dynamic of the oppression, suppression of women. And, and here we are on a rather monumental news day about that issue, where Justice Alito has basically changed the language and what his draft is on this issue on abortion. It's pretty appalling, if you ask me.
Appalling. How can this happen in this day and age?
Well, well, one of my things, I found myself on Sunday doing something about, seeing another part of it, but women's films, women-directed films in the United States of America, according to an international report from now 4+ years ago, said that women's and mainstream screen, so we're talking about your main theater downtown or whatever, are shown 2.75% of the time. That's pretty appalling. And there was an article that a newsletter write-up that maybe you get it, called Screen Slate, and they sent out a notice on, I think it was Sunday. Sunday's when I read it. It could have come out the day before, but they had just done an interview with Stuart Bird and Deborah Schaefer on their film The Wobblies, which is now in revival. And Deborah's an old friend. And so I read the article, and then I decided, I'm going to look at the films that are shown that they're talking about are being screened in New York City, all in basically alternative cinema. So Film Forum, Anthology, The Quad, et cetera, et cetera. 20% of the films, of 43 films, were by women. Yeah. Here we are in 2022. This is not sufficient out of a big progressive city, which has a lot of venues.
Yeah. And
so I put that out on Twitter. I also just put it out on the Art House Convergence today.
Yeah.
We'll see. But it's the problem that if our work, our visions are not seen by the general audience, then we don't exist, and we don't see the change that women have created, which is huge.
It's huge. No, you really get what I'm after, and you know how to put the question I ask into the context you want. This is really good. Your observations of humans in general, are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Well, I think that'll vary again from human to human. I think we're in I've had a weird experience in my community in the last few weeks where I've had some business interactions with people, and they all say to me, or two people already in the last few weeks have said to me, I don't watch the news. I either can't evaluate it, what's truthful or not, or I don't watch the news because none of it's truthful.
Yeah.
And I would say that those processes are more on the side of feeling rather than thinking.
Yeah.
And that we are in a dangerous time of history where there's more feeling than thinking.
Yeah, it's good. These are two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
That's a great question. Again, I think it's going to depend on the person, because I think some of us are much more tuned into our souls than others. And therefore, what comes out of that process is different than someone who is maybe not very connected to their soul.
Very good. Alan Turing's second question is, can machines think?
Well, I think we're in another danger zone there too, because artificial intelligence is quite progressed, certainly from his era.
Yeah.
And there will be a time when machines do think, but the problem is how they're programmed. And 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 this is a big, huge problem in the technical world, that the programming is very limited, very restricted by your cultural, aesthetic, gender background. And it could be a disaster.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Oh, I had someone tell me today, "Oh, well, you should come to lunch with us. You should stop being so busy. You're too old to be busy." And I think that you know um, I think happiness certainly comes out of one's work.
Yeah.
And in fact, I read a great line. I can't even remember where it came from today about that. I think it must be in this biography I'm reading of Lillian Hellman.
Yeah. Well, Lillian's one of my heroes because she said this great line I use all the time. People change and forget to tell you they changed. That is such an amazing line. So, what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Probably speed of thought, because when inventions happen in the world, sometimes they happen in different parts of the world. And my husband always said that those thoughts, they're out there in the universe. And it's a matter of whether you tap into that thought in the universe. And as we progress as a society, groups of people are more attuned to parallel kinds of things. And so invention, ideas, things can simultaneously take place.
Really well put. And here's a quote from Audre Lorde, the great poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded to her and said, "You can if you expose the tool." Now, the question is what new tool do you suggest? And again, you put in the context you want. Just to clarify, it doesn't have to be a new tool. It's more like, what tool do you gravitate towards? And you can apply it to dismantling the master's house or not.
Well, I came of age in filmmaking at the same time that the Porta-Pack developed. And the Porta-Pack was an extensive tool that feminists used in their work, both as a consciousness-raising tool for feedback about what was going on, but also as a tool to document what was going on in our communities. And in fact, I was involved in a national project which had a little bit of international input, called International Video Letters, that happened between 1975 and 1977. And I ran a conference with other feminist film media people in the 75, and we identified 67 US-based women's media groups.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. And so, yes, not every group is going to survive the long haul, but it's remarkable that there were so many groups back then, and the majority were working in video. And that's why we started the Video Letters project. And we did exchanges every other month. We made tapes and exchanged. Basically, there were 26 groups in basically 9 cities that were actively involved for a while, not everybody over the whole 2-year period. But that work, at the time, we didn't know how valuable the work really was. So now slowly we're unearthing some of that material. And there's no other parallel project that happened quite that early with that kind of level of development, and whatever. So I think that, and it's not that the tapes were really kind of interesting. I mean, there was one from Tucson, and they fry an egg on the street to show us how hot it is in Tucson. And
Nice.
I'm hoping that tape survived, but I don't know.
Oh, yeah, and you can digitize it. I mean, if you haven't seen it, Skip Bloomberg just put out an 8-minute clip of May Day 1971.
Uh-huh.
And have you seen it? He just put it out as a preview.
Yeah.
I'll send you the clip. It's amazing. And
Yeah.
it's just Portapak was really one of my first tools besides Super 8 films. So that was good. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Well, let's see. A couple of things. One is I'm worried that the feminist media history is going to get lost, especially the 1970s radical work like I just described of video
Yeah.
letters. My own work even.
Yeah.
The whole first 10 years of Women Make Movies history, where we taught community women filmmaking and did productions. That's not written up anywhere, really. The productions in particular have not been seen. And I think we were doing pretty revolutionary, different kind of work than the rest of the independent film community, and certainly Hollywood. And yet the the work that we hear about is video freaks and et cetera. The big three mostly male groups.
Yeah. So that was good. And I appreciate it. Just the fact that you're saying it now live on TV across the world, and it's going to be on YouTube forever from this point on. Thank God somebody's saying it. And hopefully we inspire some young person to go, let's go do that project. Because I mean, you've been a pioneer. You've been a real go-getter in keeping that.
No, you're absolutely right. This is ripe for somebody's really important dissertation.
Yeah.
That focus.
Yeah. So Marshall McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race, whether it's art being filmmaking, painting, poetry, literature. You know what I mean by arts. So they're the antenna of the race, and they're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So like you could really suss out more what the Portapak did to us in shaping our behavior than just documenting image of film or of documenting news. It changed us in other ways, little deeper. And so, and then what Pound was saying is then we can learn to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So I asked you the question McLuhan asked, why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though artists are broadcasting them to us?
I think commercialization of media is a real barrier to understanding the depth of that kind of a question, to be perfectly frank. And we are deeply in trouble about that, about the internet and social media. But I wanted to bring up two oddball comments about Marshall McLuhan and Ezra Pound.
Please.
Marshall McLuhan, when he started teaching at Fordham, he lived
Yes.
he lived in Bronxville, so we used to come to the Sarah Lawrence Library where I would sit and do reading, whatever. So I would occasionally sort of see him in the library.
Yeah.
Never had any interaction with him. But in high school, I went to a DC public high school, and students would go visit Ezra Pound at the St. Elizabeth's Hospital.
Yes.
So they weren't part of my personal interaction, but they were a part of the experience of my growing up in terms of a dynamic in living in those time periods and whatever. And I don't know, my high school was especially unusual. So anyway,
No, I like the commercialization point too.
yeah,
It's really,
go
it's
back.
really no, I like the two anecdotes. That's the beauty of this.
Right.
Anecdotes flush out who we are. And so this is really good. I welcome those kind of things. But the commercialization of media is interesting because I have a question, and we're going to get into film in a while. There's just a few more sort of philosophical things I want to discuss, but I have to bring it up now. As I used to ask, has film as an art form been swindled by capitalism? Or, no, it was in the LA Times once. It says film as an art form has been swindled by capitalism. And I asked Craig Baldwin to comment. He says, yeah, and it's our job to swindle it back. And then it's like almost like, well, you don't want to become your enemy. But I just think this idea that cinema is 130 years old, and it is been this consumer capitalistic
Well,
medium.
it's extremely difficult because the major export of the United States of America is Hollywood cinema.
That's it.
And
Yeah.
that imagery, which is largely depicts women as sex objects, is seen in every corner of the globe.
Totally. Yeah.
And we will undergo a shift with more of China's involvement in film at this point with that. But it goes back to the thing that I was saying earlier about how women-directed films are only 2.75% of screened films in the United States. So how does the change? I mean, so I can point to different points in the history in the last 50 years where women filmmakers are more common today. We're at 10% in Hollywood or 17% or whatever. But the reality is, I mean, and this is the image. I mean, I have an image that I put out of Laura Mulvey and I were both at a conference together, she virtually and me in person in Albuquerque at Experiments in Cinema in 2016. And we both said in our different workshops the same thing. We thought we would be further along by now.
By now, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And with decisions like, what the Supreme Court's going to do on abortion will be just a horrible, horrible setback, not just for women.
And
I keep trying to help other people understand that this is not real. I mean, yes, women have been leading this issue, but it doesn't just affect women. It's going to very poorly affect those children that have to be born that are not desired.
Yeah. This is what I really appreciate in meeting you in Ann Arbor this year in our discussions is you probe the surface level, but also the hidden, I call it hidden psychic effects, or the deeper level. People wouldn't go, well, people don't go, it's not going to affect me. And it's like, no, there's a bigger picture here. Comprehensive awareness is important. Do artists have moral obligation?
Absolutely. I think so.
Yeah.
And, I think It's sometimes a little hard for many artists to sort of see that, but that we definitely, I mean, the whole reason I think you're drawn to being a cultural worker, that you play with your art form and create, story, image, sound, whatever it is because you're seeking something new to explain what is going on. And one of um, one of the phenomenas when the Reagan administration, well, before the Reagan administration started, during the election, there was a report that came out from the Heritage Foundation that called for the elimination of the National Endowment on the Arts and the National Endowment on the Humanities. And that was like, a big bell went off in my head, and I started looking at what funding for women's arts organizations was going on. And the funding for the NEA went like this, but for women's art organizations, it went like that.
Wow.
And, it wasn't just women, it was women, any social change issue. I mean, that was the focus. It wasn't so much groups of color.
Yeah.
But if you had a social justice bent, you were on the, you were sitting, your application was sitting in stacks outside of the chairman's office. And,
Yeah.
and I would try to warn other members of the cultural community that, this was affecting our groups, and you all need to stand up and speak out.
Yeah.
They did not understand. They said that things like what women's groups are doing is derivative, and therefore, defunding them is okay.
Yeah.
And then the culture wars blew up in the 90s. And I had to retreat because there wasn't anywhere for me to go at that point. There wasn't work that would give me the kind of platform on which to speak out and to lead on this issue, because it took 10 years for it to happen.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we lost a lot of stuff in that time period.
and I appreciate raising awareness is so important, and what you've done has inspired me. We're going to go into that and film in a few more minutes, but just a couple background questions. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Yes, actually. I remember my dreams from when I was like 3 and 4. And therefore, I also remember what the house was like where I lived. And I still, the dreams of these, monsters, big monsters walking down the hall and whatever. And, that's very strong. And then the other thing, sort of counter to that is, we had a stream and there were woods nearby. And I remember as a kid, I remember going into the woods, with an older brother all the time.
Yeah.
It was, that experience was, remarkable.
Beautiful. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it's a blessing myself.
Yeah.
But
tell me someone within your immediate family, just briefly, and then outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, sort of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Well, my mother worked pretty much most of my time growing up, but actually it's my paternal grandmother who is a very strong role model, and she was very involved in the WETS campaign during the 30s. And she organized the entire state of Pennsylvania to vote to repeal the prohibition.
Wow.
And unfortunately, she died when I was I was 11 when she died. So I ended up learning this kind of after the fact, but she was great.
That activist blood was in you, it sounds. It was sort of like to go get him. So then outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what was that specific impact?
I would say my peers.
Yeah.
I'm still very close with people that I went to junior high school and senior high school with, and a few of those people even from elementary school. We grew up in Washington, D.C. Many of my classmates are Black, and we're in segregated schools when we started school. And the issue of Brown versus Board of Education and what happened in DC and the school system almost always comes up in our discussions whenever we get together.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. But then our high school was the Western High School, which then later became Duke Ellington. But Western had an extreme mix of, well, there was open enrollment, so kids can come from different parts of the city to come to the Western school, and Western was located on the edge of Georgetown, and most of the Georgetown kids were all in private schools. So there was a lot of opening there, but it housed refugee kids from the revolution in 1956 from Hungary, a lot of expats from Latin America, as well as, higher up kids whose parents worked in the administration. So it was a very mixed, unusual group of high school students.
Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Well, I'm Christian Episcopalian, but not a practicing member. When we would go to our grandparents out in Virginia, where the paternal grandmother lived, we would always go to church with them and celebrate Easter or some holiday.
Do you pray now?
In a way, yes. Not more in a spiritual, non-affiliated kind of way.
Yeah. If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Gosh, I have no idea.
That's all right.
But I hope she would do it nicely. That's
nicely. Yeah, that's good. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think there actually are evil people. I mean, I in the same way that they're good people. I mean, I think I don't think goodness or evilness are abstract entities outside of us that glom onto us.
Yes. Yeah. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I think I sort of tend to fall into that camp a bit because I find, like, if I'm on social media and there's somebody's image that I don't like or agree with, I move on.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in amplifying that image or voice or whatever.
Yeah.
So
But what's your whole attitude? Like, if you had a young person come up to you and you said, "I have an enemy. How should I deal with this?" How would you advise them?
well, I'm grappling with that myself. I mean,
Yeah,
because I have an enemy and I'm trying to figure out how to deal with them.
yeah,
um, yeah, and it's very frustrating. I mean, this is I'm very involved or dragged into being involved in my own local government here, and it tends to my city commission tends not to want to follow its own rules, let alone state rules or the Constitution.
yeah. I learned early on, studying conflict resolution, that it's not you versus them, it's you and them versus the problem. And that gets to be difficult because it boils down to dialogue, or some sort of negotiating.
Right.
So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin at a cinema, Volta Cinema, about 100 years ago. And he basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?"
There's a very interesting film called The Man of the Trees and he was very active in the 50s. And it's in a booklet that I wrote most of the film descriptions in 1992, of environmental films. And the guy, I don't remember his name, I'm sorry, but he's driving through the Sahara Desert, which he proclaims was once a forest.
Yeah.
And there he is, driving along in the desert, and all we see is sand and whatever. And all of a sudden, he comes to a tree in the middle of the Sahara Desert. And this is all on film.
Yeah.
And so I think there are some values for going inside and looking at a film. And
Right.
I mean, it's a wonderful piece of documentation,
And is that a feature documentary?
I don't think it's a feature. I think it's, a half an
Sure.
hour or 40 minutes, somewhere in that level. I'll after
Yeah.
I'll dig it up in the title and send you the details.
No, that was beautiful. So, what first attracted you to pursue film? Like, just walk us through it sort of briefly. Did your parents take you to movies growing up? Do you watching films on TV? And mainly I'm after is, when was the tipping point where what'd you study in college and where'd you go, "I want to do that. I want to pursue film. I want to pursue." You talked about the Porta Packs, so that could be part of it, but just a little bit of your history on being pursuing film.
Have you ever seen the film The Little Fugitive?
Yeah, that's
So
that's
nine-
that's
19,
considered that's
19
considered yeah, it's
yeah, one
considered
of the
the
original
first.
independent films, right?
Yeah, it's considered the first independent. I love that film. Yeah,
Well, I saw it at the time when it was made, and I've questioned all of my siblings and friends around us, because one of the filmmakers, who was Ray Abrashkin, was friends of my parents. And the film is not released until 1953, and we moved in 1953 from Connecticut, where my parents knew Ray Abrashkin, to California. And I remember seeing the film and being horrified because I was the age of the kid in the film, and the idea of being lost the way he was traumatizing to me. But I
Yeah.
have very, very clear memories of seeing the film at a young age. So that was sort of one. So by 1956, we left California, and my mother landed her 4 kids in Washington, D.C., because she was divorcing my father. And every Saturday, she would drive us all the way to the other side of town, where we would watch all the old classic silent films. So as a 9, 10-year-old, I got to see, all of Buster Keaton, all of, Charlie Chaplin, the works. I mean, the Keystone Cops, et cetera, et cetera. And then I don't think I had any ambition to be a filmmaker. I really thought I would be a painter, an artist. But at college, at Sarah Lawrence. I did not like most of the art teachers. I loved the graphic teacher, Ansei Uchima, that I had. He was great. But not the painting teachers. And then my junior year, they taught that there was what I thought was the first film class at Sarah Lawrence, taught by Bill Parks. Did the lecture series. He was a literature teacher and had never done anything like that before. And Will Leach, does that name ring any bells to you?
No, but
he ran
yeah.
he ran the theater program at Sarah Lawrence, but he then also he was really very instrumental in oh God, I've just blanked on his name. Carrie. It'll come to me. Brian De Palma. He was very instrumental in Brian De Palma's early filmmaking work, and
Nice.
Will then went on to make Pirates of Penzance.
Yeah.
And that was my film teaching background. But I started teaching kids in an after-school program. And then when I got out of college, there was the combination. I got a job teaching youth filmmaking and the women's movement and the consciousness. I mean, that was so clear that the image of women was just disgusting in movies. And it was an open ballpark of what you could do. I mean, if you could get your hands on celluloid and a camera and then get it seen.
But you're touching on the next question so well, because you're saying it was so clear to you. So there was something in you and your background that you saw that. But this goes along with the question. A screenwriting teacher told me a great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great film, great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process? And it's twofold, as a filmmaker and as an educator.
Well, I think the important thing was always, from that perspective, was to draw out the story inside of anyone. So and we all have them. It's just, and certainly, in that time period, we were working and teaching, either depending on the age group, you were working with 16 millimeter, teaching that, or Super 8, with younger kids generally. And for me personally, as a filmmaker, there were very few women who were skilled in film skills at the time period. So having an all-woman crew on productions for us was very, very important. And, it was sort of a no-brainer. And so when I see people today sort of, oh, well, let's have a novel women's crew. And I'm thinking, what? You know nothing about the history of what's going on. And then having women's stories told, and I think we're still stuck in that land a lot. That the women's stories are, we've only scratched the surface of a few kinds of women's stories that have been told on film today. And there are many, many, many more. And, many of us, especially Julie Dash, one of our more important filmmakers of my era, is, has barely been able to make the films that she should have been able to make.
Yeah.
It's criminal. I'm sorry. It makes me very angry to
Yeah.
know that gifted filmmakers like her have been shunned aside.
Yeah.
And that instead, and that women filmmakers today should direct Star Wars or, some comic book story that has nothing to do with women's lives whatsoever.
Yeah. But again, I'm trying to find the roots of you being a feminist. Is it the way your mom raised you? Is it the way your grandmother was,
I'll tell you what. Okay, I was a political activist as a junior and high school student, and involved. So we lived in DC with the DC public schools run by the United States Congress.
Yeah.
And we went around and showed how poor some of the facilities and the tools were in the DC public schools, DC public high school students. We ran a group, and that got me very involved in political stuff and testifying in Congress and lobbying Congress and whatever. And then I wanted to, in 1963, I wanted to be a page in the United States Senate. And guess what? They wouldn't accept girls.
Oh my God. So that's really you practically learning feminism from your pursuit in being the door shut.
Right. And it was kind of like overlooked and not thought about at the time in a way, because even the Civil Rights Act hadn't been passed yet, and and there are other things, but clearly it was a very, Tommy Reston, son of Scotty Reston, who ran the New York Times in DC at that point, was the class ahead of me in junior high school, and he got to be a page. And so did, another, kid I didn't know, but he went to school with other kids I did know. Al Gore got to be a page. Yeah. Or my neighbor, Thomas Dodd's son, Chris Dodd, he got to be a page. Yeah. So I was aware that, that my contemporaries were getting, these brownie points, as young kids that I was deprived of.
Yeah. One other question, I want to get into this deeper, but just to follow the script for a second is, Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your audience when you're making your film?
That's a very good question. And it depends on the film. And I think that because so few women's stories have been told on film still, that the films, actually, Deborah Schaefer said this very, very interesting. She was interviewed on Democracy Now! Last Friday for the Wobblies, and she said, the film is more relevant today than when we first released it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's universally true of a lot of the material that was shot in the 1970s. Yeah. One of the other things about women in the 1970s, women joined the artist workforce 2.5 times at a greater rate than they joined any other workforce in the United States during the 1970s.
Wow.
That is, without a doubt, an astounding piece of data. and nobody's used it. Nobody's talked about it, whatever. And I find it fascinating because I've done a lot of research on a lost woman artist from the 1880s. And I think also after the Civil War, there was a large increase in the number of artists, and they go to Europe for the most part to, perfect their skills and crafts and activity. But I think the issue of violence and war that we had all witnessed in the Vietnam War created that push.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
Well, this is really good because what it does is I would love to do future salons with you on specific topics like these specific things, because then we can flush it out bigger. But in this regard, we're going to stay on track just to get this background on who you are. But each one of these little issues you bring up could make a whole 90-minute salon, and then you could bring in other guests like Deborah or whoever. So I just found this quote by Yoko Ono, and I think she said it in the 70s, in fact, actually at the Cannes Film Festival in the 70s. She said, "The job of an artist is not to destroy, but to change the value of things. And by doing that, artists can change the world into a utopia where there is total freedom for everybody." Any comment?
It's a wonderful quote. I mean, she too went to Sarah Lawrence. And I think it's very accurate. I think that, that's why, I mean, other than the fact that there was no distribution for women's films, it was a no-brainer that we set up distribution at Women Make Movies. And, and we were told at the time women were not an audience. And, and I think we're still, today it's sort of women are not box office would be the parallel kind of translation of that. And we're still in that, stuck in that era. I think we need to filmmakers really need to go out into communities all across the country and show their work and other filmmakers' work. And, break down those barriers and engage people in making art.
Yeah. And you've been a curator as well as an educator and a filmmaker. I appreciate that. This other quote I just found, my poet friend gave me, and it's Fanny Howe. She said, "The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't." Any comment on that one? Because
that one's a little harder because you get sort of stuck on the other end of her,
right. But showing that it isn't is a paradoxical thing, and we're still trying to suss it out. Right. But what do you think the motive of the cave artist was? You brought it up earlier. We don't have cave film. We don't have cave dance. We don't have cave music. But for some reason, we have cave paintings. And, it's not so much what documentarians like Herzog made his cave painting film or anthropologists say, but your hunch.
Well, I think one of the things that I like about filmmaking and the kind of filmmaking that I've been involved in is that there's a part of it that's you're creating an environment of what you want to have happen, or what might be called wishful filmmaking. And I think that it's possible that because so much of the cave art is about hunting.
Yeah.
That was if they realized the hunt on the edge of the cave, then it would happen. Then they would have food for, the winter or whatever.
You mean the art helped manifest the reality of accomplishing the hunt?
Of the task, exactly. Yeah. And if you look at the sort of the structure of of my films and Sheila's films, or even the workshop films to a large extent. I mean, this image behind me is taken by Susan Misalis, and it's from a production of Fear that Women Make Movies did. It's probably one of the first films that deals with rape as an issue, from 1973. And you know, and audiences would cheer when the film was shown. I mean, because it was so unusual that the woman is victorious at the end.
Well, fill in the blank. Anger can be a productive emotion when
you create a constructive push through that anger.
Yeah. So another thing McLuhan talked about was how we extend humanness with our inventions. So knife and fork extends our teeth, clothing extends our skin, the shutter in the camera is an extension of our eyelid, and even non-tangible like philosophy or religion is an extension of consciousness. What does the moving image camera extend for you? Whether it's the Portapak or the 16mm Bolex or, you know, a cell phone now, what humanness is extended by the moving image camera?
Well, it's interesting because you know, we all now have that possibility pretty much on our cell phone to both take a still image or a film image.
Yeah.
And I find actually that I'm training myself more. I mean, I'm looking at when I choose to make a video as opposed to a still image. And I actually had an interesting little experience about that today, because they were grading the road where I run my dog, which is along the Rio Grande. And I realized, oh, this is not a still photograph. This is a moving image. So I think, you know, and then the other part of that is, okay, so I took this image. What do I do with it? What images motivate people?
Yeah.
And therefore, how do we get those images to the community that makes them want to make an action or change their consciousness or learn something or whatever? I mean, you know,
No, it's a big thing. We're in a Carl Jung reading group, and last night we brought up this thing about thought, verbalizing, and action. You can think something, then you can verbalize it, and then you can put it into action. So
right. So apropos of that, in this year's Experiments in Cinema, which goes live next Monday, the 9th, and to the 23rd, which anybody in the globe can see, is a piece that I made, 11-minute piece, a little over 11 minutes, called Arbitrary and Capricious. And it's about my city and the legal struggle we're having over smart meters and blah, blah, blah. I mean, so one of the things that I'm thinking more and more about is what goes on in our daily lives that works or doesn't work, and how do you record a piece of that and then put it together in a different kind of way. I mean, I'm finding that it's one thing to go to public meetings and speak out, but maybe my better skill is as a filmmaker and how to create the story of the problem, not so much, you know, so I'm trying to make it an art form.
Well, go get them. Did you know McLuhan made a short political film with Jane Jacobs? Did you know?
No, I don't know.
It's on YouTube. It's called A Burning Wood. It's a phrase from Finnegan's Wake. It's spelled WOULD, a burning wood. And it was that they were pretty much saying, we don't want this highway to go through the middle of Toronto.
Right.
So It is like you can utilize film, especially in this day and age with YouTube or TikTok or Instagram to alert people about political messages on a local level. So in that regard, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Conviction that is able to compromise.
Oh, nice. I love that. You've accomplished a lot in your life so far, and I look forward to your book.
So do I.
These three elements, what played the biggest role, second and third? Luck, skill, and ambition. What would you place first, second, and third?
I think I was very lucky in the time period that I, came of age and what I've done, and that I have a lot of ambition about my vision about what that's about. And so I'd say skill is the least of the important aspects. But but I probably have some savvy about that as well. But
There's a discussion I had with the Michael Apted 40 years ago. He made Coal Miner's Daughter, and he made a documentary on a Russian rock star, and it was right when MTV was breaking. And I said, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? He said, because we've learned to take in information faster.
well,
And, Marty, most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it really flourished in the 80s. Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. So my question is, and it's asked with a bias, can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
I think there probably is a limit somewhere along the line. I don't know what that limit is. We are so we're in an era where we're inundated with information and imagery and whatever, ad infinitum, and I think that could be one of the reasons why the two people I referred to earlier don't trust the media and don't watch it. That they're not able to take in that information. So but actually visually, I think about this quite a bit, because I think our visual senses are most developed, or visual perception is our most developed sense. And so I think if we don't learn how to use it creatively, we'll lose it. I mean, like historically, I think we were much better at mental telepathy than we are today.
Really good point. I like that.
And for instance, and now we have lost a lot of that sense.
Yeah,
We're probably losing a lot of sense of taste because the food is so bad. It's so poorly grown.
totally.
So that somebody who was like an herbalist could taste something and know that it did these properties, whereas the average person is lost in that skill.
Yeah.
I mean, these are innate skills that we have all historically had, but we're throwing them out the window.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate your observations there, and they really resonate with how I think. The hidden question there really is, can humans literally multitask?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
We do. I mean, and some do it okay, and some don't do it okay. And I'm a few years older than you are, but I think that if I can accomplish one thing a day, that's a lot these days. Whereas 10, 15 years ago it was maybe 3 or 4. And also, I mean, as a sometime New Yorker, as opposed to someone from LA, you would go around and interview or have 6 meetings in New York. If you had 2 in LA, that was a
Yeah.
lot.
Oh, no, I'll tell Experiments in Cinema is my pinnacle. Before the shows started, like at 4 or 5 in the evening, I did 3 90-minute interviews. I'd line them up, and I was like, "Wow, now 1 interview sort of drains me per day." I could do 2, but it was really fun, and
Yeah.
I loved that festival, and I loved attending it the years I did. Now, you brought up the word perception, and I'm curious, is perception reality?
Sure. But, what I perceive and what you perceive or what my dog perceives are different,
Yeah,
and so therefore how we discuss reality then becomes a little more tricky.
yeah,
Um, and therein lies the crux.
yeah. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
I'm pretty I mean, um I'm pretty visually oriented, so I think in pictures and like pictures. I mean, I have a huge collection of images, on my
Yeah.
computer that I actually really wanted to be an animator, you
Did
know,
you really? Wow.
and um, you know, I did a painting that I animated, and that was the end. um, I mean, I did a little bit of animation when I was in college, but I could never really develop, found the way to develop skills and got all involved in other things. But I love animation's great. My film Surviva has a lot of animation in it, but my partner was the animator.
But it
And
also sounds like you formed oh, go ahead.
well, and then I've just recently found this young woman, young, she's my age. I haven't met her yet. But she just about a decade ago installed an Oxberry in the wilderness here in New Mexico, and so
Nice.
she's made a couple of animation films. So, maybe there's more to come. We'll see.
Beautiful. And it sounds like you formed an aesthetic for painting early on. You said that you sort of aspired to be a painter. It sounds like you went to art museums. If any painter from any era could paint your portrait, who would you want? Or, do an art, yeah, some sort of who do you gravitate towards painter wise?
Gosh, a lot of flashes have come to my brain. Artemisia Gentilisi would be an interesting one. Not that I mean, I would like sort of a mix, to be perfectly frank. I mean, it would be great to have an Alice Neal. She did such wonderful work. So there are two complete extremes of each of painting. I actually have one of my collections of images is portraits of myself, and I do sort of maybe see a possible quick animation of those portraits.
Oh, that sounds great. I love the idea of a mix, having two. I've never had that answer. But there's this other thing my friend talks about, the 3 elements of music: theory, technique, and taste. So theory is, and it could apply to film, education, whatever. Theory is knowing, how the things work. Technique is being able to do it. How does one acquire taste, whether it be in painting, film, literature?
Um, I guess by a lot of exposure,
Yeah.
that um, get a chance to see a lot of different work, and it probably helps if you are yourself a creative person, so you're working in that art form, and you play with the tools of that form. Uh, but
Well, no,
I think exposure is the key thing.
yeah, no, I like both those words, exposure and play. That's beautiful. So George Manupelli started the Ann Arbor Film Festival 60 years ago, and that's where we met. So thank you, George. And his mantra was ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And the great jazz pianist Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle, and this just comes through me. So it's a stupid question. It's basically both, and it depends. But in just your hunch or guess, is art making, filmmaking more self expression or more vehicles for whatever culture, technology, environment is dominant?
Well, I think it can kind of be both, to be frank. The but I you know what, if you're not aware of what else is going on in the art form, you may be kind of out to lunch about what you're talking about or whatever. I'm not sure about that. But
Can art making be egoless?
yes, I think it can. One of the very nice things that some of the experiments in cinema said about my own film work and my partner Sheila Page's was that we brought together an ensemble into our filmmaking in which everybody, you know, contributed on some kind of level. And so your job is to, be like an orchestra conductor to, play that information into, a story, into a completed project. So I think it can be less ego oriented. And probably that's a good goal because maybe we have too many egos in our world that are in conflict.
Beautiful. I love that. Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell me one.
um, well, I've been having a conversation with a filmmaker who I'm uh, going to do Q&A with at the Anthology Film Archives the end of the month. And um, I suggested that maybe all the GOP should trip over a tripwire today and they should all fall down on their heads and crack them open.
Wow, and becoming that's I love that. That sounds like an impossible thing, but wow, it's not. It's like Sidney Lumet saying, "Film can't do anything, but it's not going to keep me from trying."
Right, right.
So tell me one major element of your creative uh ness, your creative process and in your creative output. One major element that stayed the same since you started, and one major element that's changed.
Well, I'm still centrally connected to the camera as a key element. And so I think, of the tool and the image or whatever to, what I'm going to capture. And maybe even more so. Um, and so what's changed? Um, Well, I think before, when I was working at Women Make Movies, I had more access to assemble a crew and do things together with a group of people. I'm probably today much more isolated. And so thinking about these things individually is more of a reality and a struggle.
Well, that fits perfect. Next question. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Um, I'm actually quite shy. um, and, you know, so I think um, I've had to learn how to be vocal. And I mean, it may sound sort of odd because I'm pretty vocal, but it's not necessarily an easy task. And, and you're always going to be afraid that you didn't say the right thing at the right time or whatever. But
Yeah.
I um, it's too important not to speak out, I think is part of it too, that I mean, I think we're in a very weird time where on one level there are a lot more people who are speaking out that just aren't in my immediate community.
Well, Ariel, I really appreciate you reached out in Ann Arbor to start the conversation a couple times, and so a few more. We got about 9 more minutes, and I appreciate your time. How do you find peace of mind?
I'm not sure I really do. Uh, I actually retreat quite. I mean, I'm finding more and more like I'll take a nap. Um,
Yes.
and part of that sort of an age thing, but um, and also I think I since 1976 I've lived in rural communities. I don't
Yeah.
live in an urban environment, and I
Yeah.
think that has been um, helpful to me to focus in my, to have a natural environment where I'm looking out and I'm not looking at, buildings or whatever. And also I've actually, when I go to cities, the lights really get to me.
Yeah.
The buzz of the lights is really hard. But the other thing that it's given me is an ability to therefore look at what goes on in the city. I mean, why has nobody dissected the movie screenings of of the progressive cinemas in New York City and said,
Yeah.
not enough women directors? I mean, I think I wouldn't have that consciousness if I were living in the city, trapped in the middle of all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like if a fish doesn't know they're swimming in water unless you get out of the fish is out of the water. That's
Right,
all.
right.
Yeah. We've swam in that. Can you forget to die?
um, Maybe, because I'm so busy. But I do think, death is a sort of a my husband died 4 years ago, and so I've been living on my own. My best friend here in town just died. Um, so I'm very conscious of death is there, um, and also how you cope with the loss. It's been very difficult. I mean, And I think the fact that, kind of I'm older at this point, and concerned that, well, I'll jump to sort of a different kind of thing. Have you s I think we talked about the film Be Natural about Alice Guy Blaché, which you should see.
I I've watched it since we talked,
Oh,
and
good.
I have it on my notes right here to bring
Okay.
it up. So you slid right into that so
Well,
perfectly.
okay, so one of the things that is I I've known about Alice since I saw her work in 1973 at a women's film festival in Toronto.
Yeah,
And when I gave a lecture a decade ago about at the time of Women Make Movies 40th anniversary, I end the lecture with saying, Alice Guy Blaché that we know almost nothing about will be, I don't remember maybe it's like she'll be 150 in a few years,
yeah,
X years down the road, and Sheila will be 100. Sheila Page, who I started Women Make Movies with, will be 100, and I'll be 99. And, and I'm putting our history in the context of the fact that we don't know Alice Guy Blaché's history, right?
yeah,
And we've made a little progress. The Eisenstein Institute has now accepted that Sergei Eisenstein was directly influenced by Alice Guy Blaché.
yeah,
The baby carriage going down the steps in the battleship Potemkin is straight out of Alice Guy Blaché's work.
yeah.
Um, so am I the only one who knows that or remembers that? No, there are a few other people, but generally, is that being taught in film school? No. But
And the shocker is, how did we not know this? When you see, I mean, Pamela, I'm negotiating to interview Pamela, who made that
Oh,
film.
good. Oh, great.
Really, I mean, she really kicked butt. That film is so
No,
strong, in my
it's
opinion.
it is a remarkable film, and I came to the film through being a Kickstarter supporter.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
it's 4 years old.
right.
It's
Well,
I checked it out from my library on a
oh,
DVD.
oh, that's great. Great.
That was amazing, but it's so powerful,
It
and
is.
just she put her heart and soul into saying this, and all these people, why didn't I know this? Why? I mean, this is just like startling.
Well,
Yeah.
so I've just bumped into a similar situation about the um, uh, conductor Antonia Brico.
Yes, I
So,
know.
there's a 1974 film made by Jill Godmillo about Antonio Brico that she made with Judy Collins, who was a student of
Yeah.
Brico's, and just recently there's a documentary that was on Great Performances on PBS called The Conductor, but it's about another woman, younger, maybe a decade or 15 years younger than I am, who struggles through the ranks with no reference to Antonio Brico in the film.
Whoa.
So I was really kind of, and in addition, the other thing that's very, very important about the Antonio Brico documentary that Jill Godmiddle made is that she joins forces with, and I'm going to lose his name, I can't remember right now, but he made the film on I.F. Stone's Weekly.
Yes, I know that film.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Those two films were put together and four-walled all across the country and opened up the door for documentary films to be shown in movie theaters.
Oh, nice.
And that piece of history is not well recorded or documented or
Yeah.
whatever, nor, again, is it referred to in this filmmaker's documentary about the conductor. But then in addition, there's another film called The Conductor, a dramatic piece made by a filmmaker named Maria Peter from Denmark, and it's a dramatic story of Antonio Brico's life. It's gorgeous.
Wow.
So
I'm gonna
that
look into this.
yeah, so that came out a few years before the
Yeah.
documentary with the same title. So, you know, I mean, I'm dying to interview Jill Godmiller now. Because and it was apparently her film shown on public television or whatever in Holland a decade ago. They've got the Danish filmmaker, I mean, Danish.
Yeah.
I think I can't remember. Maybe she's Dutch and not Danish.
But I think Jill won an Oscar, was nominated Best Doc.
That film.
Yeah,
Hmm.
for the Judy Collins film, yeah.
It
And I
may,
think
it's possible, right? I
and
don't
I
remember.
think I'm almost certain it was shown in Ann Arbor too. We saw it in Ann Arbor. But, I just wanted to clear, we've gone 90. Can you go another 10, 20, or 30 minutes? Give me
Sure,
just a
sure,
ballpark. What do
sure.
you feel
Yeah,
comfortable at?
let's try 15.
Okay, 15, that's perfect. So just stay on that for 1 second is, Nadia Boulanger was the French music educator who spawned all the great men of the world. You know about her, and there's a doc on
Not
YouTube.
much. I don't know much about
Yeah,
her.
but there's a doc on her that's free on YouTube. Quincy Jones, Aaron Copland, it's endless. So, anyways, that was good because I'm glad you brought up Alice Guy Blanchet because I was so impressed you mentioned her in your presentation in Ann Arbor. And the other thing, just let's dive into this for a second because again, it could be a whole salon we'll do in a future Zoom if you could. Is what is curious about me is we're both aware of Nina Menken's new documentary Brainwash, which still has not played LA, and you saw it, we won a big article in the New York Times a long time ago, and you paid and saw it online. You didn't see it in a big theater. And it's a very important film tackling the female gaze, which you brought up earlier, Laura Mulvey first sort of talked about the female gaze. And I don't want to go into too deep, but just my thing is Alice is a peer with Méliès and the people who invented cinema. And she has this vision to make films and sort of is now called the inventor of narrative cinema. So she's a big player in this early moment 130 years ago of starting this medium. It's not that old. 130 years is not that old. And my contention is, it's not a contention, it's a question. Did she have something called the female gaze, or was she sort of engulfed in the fact that painters and photographers before her that she mainly saw were probably males? And so if you develop an eye on how to make films, painting and photography has some background into how you're going to frame things or what the word gaze entails. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that. And we talked about it a little. How much was that part of her sensibility, painting and photography by males, or was she just saying, I have something that's uniquely female and that's going to be my dominant?
Well, she does make I mean, women are pretty central in most of her stories, one. Um, and she does make this really, really interesting film, which is, I think, the one that really influenced Eisenstein when he was 8, called I'm sorry, I'm not remembered its title exactly, but
Right.
she reverses the roles of the men and the women, and so the men are all pushing the baby carriages, and the women are all getting dressed into suits and going to work and whatever. And so it was very dramatic to and it's also her take on feminism in the time period in which she's making the film, which is I think about 2000. I mean, excuse me, 1908. Could be a little earlier.
Yeah.
And um So I think she was very conscious of the different roles of men and women and how to tell a woman's story. Uh, whether she was trapped in the visuals of painting that had gone before her of, women were prone and men were active. I'm not sure. I mean, you don't get that sense from her work.
Right. That was good. And this another just philosophical question. What caused matriarchy?
Um, I'm not sure what caused it. I mean, certainly the role of birth plays
Yeah.
a large role
Yeah.
in women's cultures,
Yeah.
women identified cultures, which are still in existence today. We just don't look at them very much. Certainly, a lot of Native American communities, indigenous communities, have a strong female role that we don't acknowledge. Um, uh, I think I'm not sure about more there. I'd have to think about that a bit.
No, let's tackle that in a future salon because I think all those factors you brought up were really good. These are 5 quick questions from Alan Watts, just in a few words. Who started it all?
What's it?
Yeah. No, you're answering a question with a question. You win. That's what our series is all about, inventing new questions. Yeah. All his 5 questions have the word it in it. So you put it into the
We
context.
eliminated them all then.
No, you put it into the context you want. Just your
Okay.
guess or
Okay.
hunch. Who started it all?
Well, didn't so I said, what's it? I mean,
Oh,
whether
okay. You answered that. Okay. The next one is, are we going to make it?
that's a harder one. But I'd say yes.
Where do we put it?
Um, we might need to put it in the back lot.
Nice. Who's cleaning it up?
Oh, I'm afraid it's mostly women.
Is it serious?
Yes, it's very serious.
Beautiful. So there's a saying that goes, you create what you resist. You are what you hate, is how Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it. And actually, James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So what do you think of this idea? You create what you resist, not you, meaning you as a creator, but just in general, the philosophy behind that idea. One creates what one resists.
I don't buy it.
Great. Okay, let's move on. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Um, you have many more advantages today than I had. Your options are great.
Great. I like
Go for them.
beautiful. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
I don't put it on a roll myself.
That's a great, I do get that answer. Thank you. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
I'm going to pass on that one.
Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
I don't know. Nothing's coming to my brain. Maybe we're running too long at this
We're
point.
we're we're running out, but there's just about 3 more. We're out of here. This is
I
fun,
keep
and I
trying.
I really appreciate it. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Well, I think there are a huge number of young people who get what some of the dilemmas are today, and I think they are a big hope. I think, you know, um, the opportunity. I mean, like I said, if I met my 12-year-old self, the opportunities are great, in a way
Yeah,
that didn't exist in my lifetime or, at that age.
yeah. So Thornton Wilder said in 1928, "Art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time." You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes, and I really appreciate it. I'm not insinuating you haven't answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
Well, I think that you know, equality for women is an important and necessary struggle, and um, it's very, very incomplete. And as we said at the outset, today was a horrible day.
Yeah. Well, what does courage mean to you today in that regard?
Well, I think I'm lucky. I still have a level of a platform to speak out. And that I don't back off.
Yeah.
So, I think that is courage. I do find, when people say, "Oh, I don't pay attention to what's going on," I find, "Oh, you're part of the problem."
Right. Okay, last question. Thanks for your time. This has been so fun and enlightening. I hope we can do it more. What gives you the most optimism?
Well, I think knowing that communicating and taking control of that communication and sharing that with others can lead to change.
Yeah. Did you get that more from the way your parents and your peers raised you or on your own?
A combination, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the tool, came from my own experience, but maybe the consciousness behind it was how I was raised and, the circumstances in which I grew up.
Well, you used two of my favorite words, raised the consciousness. So you've really done that for me today. And thank you so much, Ariel. I really appreciate the time.
Well, thank you, Jerry. It was fun. We'll do
I'm
more.
gonna I'm gonna hit the end button, but I hope it never ends. We'll keep the
Okay.
dialogue
Take
going.
care. Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.